The bridge of the TSS Horizon hummed with quiet efficiency as Captain Jake Morrison reviewed the latest trade agreement with the Draxian Confederacy. His crew had spent 3 weeks negotiating mineral rights, and finally both sides were happy. Jake smiled at his second-in-command, Commander Lisa Hayes, who was reading through the final documents. "Another successful mission," Lisa said, her voice tired but satisfied. "That makes 12 consecutive diplomatic wins. Command will be pleased." Jake nodded and looked out at the stars through the viewport. 70 years had passed since humanity joined the galactic community. In that time, they had built relationships with over 40 different species. The Terran Coalition prided itself on being peaceful traders and skilled mediators. When other species argued over territory or resources, humans helped them find solutions. When wars threatened to break out, human diplomats worked tirelessly to prevent them. Down in engineering, Danny Price was showing a group of visiting Vex engineers how human fusion drives worked. The insectoid aliens clicked their mandibles in appreciation as Danny explained the safety features. He had made friends across the galaxy during his 10 years of service. His sister often joked that Danny knew someone on every major world in civilized space. "The key is redundancy," Danny explained, pointing to various systems. "We always have backup plans for our backup plans. Humans learned a long time ago that things can go wrong, so we prepare for everything." The Vex chief engineer, a being called Tiknash, clicked thoughtfully. "Your species is very cautious. It is admirable." Danny smiled but didn't mention why humans were so careful. He didn't talk about the wars humanity had fought against themselves. The 2 world wars that nearly destroyed Earth. The conflicts that followed. The time when humans almost made themselves extinct. Those were old stories, lessons learned centuries ago. On Earth, President Helen Wright was addressing the Galactic Council through a quantum communications link. Her holographic image stood before representatives of dozens of species. She spoke about cooperation, shared prosperity, and the bright future all species could build together if they worked as one. "The Terran Coalition believes in peace," she said, her voice warm and confident. "We have seen the cost of war in our own history. We know the pain it brings. That is why we dedicate ourselves to helping others find peaceful solutions to their problems." The council members responded positively. The reptilian Draxians nodded their approval. The gaseous Noltar pulsed with agreement. The insectoid Vex clicked their support. Humanity had earned a reputation as honest brokers and reliable friends. What none of these species knew was that humanity had learned a darker lesson from their bloody past. After nearly destroying themselves, humans had made a collective decision. They would be peaceful. They would be friendly. They would help build a better galaxy. But they would never again be caught unprepared. They would never again be weak. They would never again be victims. Far from the busy trade routes and diplomatic stations in the quiet outer rim of Terran space, Admiral George Palmer oversaw a very different operation. His command station orbited a moon that didn't appear on any galactic charts. Around it, thousands of automated weapons platforms floated in the darkness. Hidden shipyards constructed vessels that would never be registered with any authority. Research stations developed weapons that would horrify the peaceful species humanity called friends. Palmer was 60 years old and had spent his entire adult life preparing for a war he hoped would never come. He had studied every conflict in human history. He understood tactics and strategy that no other species in the galaxy had ever needed to learn. Because while other species fought wars occasionally, humans had perfected the art of killing over thousands of years of practice. "Status report," Palmer said to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Marcus Flynn. "All systems functioning at optimal capacity, sir," Marcus replied. "We now have 640 combat vessels fully armed and ready. Another 200 in various stages of construction. The defense grid is 98% complete." Palmer nodded slowly. "Good. Let's hope we never need any of it." This was the silence protocol. If humanity ever faced extinction, if any species ever threatened human survival, the mask of peace would drop. The galaxy would learn what humans really were underneath the friendly smiles and diplomatic gestures. They would discover that humanity had never forgotten how to wage total war. But Palmer believed that day would never come. Humans had been part of the galactic community for 7 decades without any major conflicts. Their strategy of peace through hidden strength seemed to be working perfectly. Then Tuesday arrived. The colony world of New Haven had been established 40 years earlier. It orbited a yellow star in a quiet sector near the galactic rim. 8 million humans called it home. Families raised children there. Farmers grew crops in rich soil. Artists created beautiful works inspired by alien skies. It was everything humanity hoped their future would be. The TSS horizon was 3 days away when New Haven's communications went silent. At first, nobody was worried. Technical problems happened sometimes. But when automated probes also stopped responding, concern turned to alarm. Captain Jake Morrison changed course immediately and pushed his engines to maximum speed. Lisa Hayes coordinated with other nearby ships. Danny Price worked frantically to squeeze more power from the fusion drives. When they arrived in the New Haven system, Jake felt his blood turn cold. His hands gripped the armrests of his command chair so hard that his knuckles turned white. Lisa made a sound like she had been punched in the stomach. Danny collapsed to his knees in engineering. The planet was gone. Not destroyed, but dead. The oceans had been turned to steam. The atmosphere was burning. The cities were melted slag. From orbit, sensors showed radiation levels that would kill any living thing instantly. It was called glassing in the old military textbooks. The complete destruction of a world from space. 8 million people had lived on New Haven that morning. By afternoon, they were all dead. Men, women, children, elderly, everyone. Erased in fire from above. Lisa's voice shook as she read the sensor data. Plasma bombardment pattern consistent with Zelthian Empire weapons. They hit every population center simultaneously. Nobody had time to evacuate. Nobody had time to even understand what was happening. Jake's mind was numb. The Zelthian Empire was a militant species from the galactic east. They valued strength above everything else, but they had never shown aggression toward humanity before. Why now? Why this? The answer came when they recovered one surviving data recorder from an orbital station. The recording showed Zelthian warships arriving without warning. It showed them opening fire immediately. And it showed the message they broadcast afterward. Humanity is weak. Humanity is soft. We take what we want from the weak. Danny Price stood in engineering with tears streaming down his face. His sister had lived on New Haven with her husband and 2 children. He would never see them again. He would never hear his nephew laugh or watch his niece graduate from school. They were ash now, scattered across a dead world. Jake Morrison sat in his command chair and felt something fundamental change inside him. All his years of diplomatic service, all his belief in peaceful cooperation, all his faith in the goodness of the galactic community. It all crumbled to dust. His hands stopped shaking. His voice became steady and cold. He opened a secure channel to Earth using a code phrase he had been given years ago but never expected to use. This is Captain Morrison of the TSS Horizon. Authorization code Red Alpha 77, confirming total destruction of New Haven colony. 8 million civilians dead. Cause, unprovoked Zelthian attack. He paused and took a breath. Masks off. I repeat, masks off. Across human space, on every military station and hidden base, the same 2 words appeared on screens. Officers who had spent decades preparing for this moment felt their hearts race. Weapon systems that had been dormant for 70 years came online. Ships that were disguised as cargo haulers dropped their camouflage. Admiral Palmer sat in his command station and watched the reports come in. He had hoped this day would never arrive. But now that it had, he felt a grim sense of purpose. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake. They had seen humanity's mask of peace and assumed it was humanity's face. They were about to learn the truth. President Wright's next address to the Galactic Council was very different from her previous ones. Her voice was not warm. Her expression was not friendly. She stood before the holographic assembly with eyes that burned with cold fury. New Haven is gone. 8 million human souls were murdered without warning, without mercy, without reason. The Zelthian Empire has shown us what the galaxy really thinks of peace. They have shown us that our friendship means nothing. Our cooperation means nothing. Our belief in a better future means nothing. She leaned forward, and every species in the council chamber felt a chill run through them. So here is humanity's response. There will be no negotiations. There will be no diplomatic solutions. There will be no forgiveness. The Zelthian Empire wanted to see humanity's true face. Their wish is granted. The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, species that had known humanity as gentle traders suddenly realized they had never really known humanity at all. The mask had been dropped, and what stood behind. The Zelthian Empire had expected retaliation. Their military analysts predicted humanity would mobilize their small defense fleet, perhaps attempt a counterattack on a border outpost, maybe even try diplomatic pressure through the Galactic Council. What they got instead was something no species in the galaxy had witnessed in over 10,000 years. They got total war. Admiral George Palmer stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Retribution. Around him, 300 warships that officially did not exist emerged from the dark spaces between stars. Each vessel had been built in secret over decades. Each carried weapons that violated dozens of galactic treaties. Each was crewed by personnel who had trained for this moment their entire lives. "All ships report ready, sir," Lieutenant Marcus Flynn said from his tactical station. His voice was calm despite the magnitude of what they were about to do. Palmer nodded slowly. "The Zelthians have 17 military installations in their border systems. I want all of them eliminated within 6 hours. No warnings, no chances to surrender. Simply erase them." The fleet split into attack groups and jumped to their targets. The Zelthians had sophisticated sensors and should have detected the approaching human ships. But humanity had been studying Zelthian technology for decades. They knew how to exploit every weakness, every blind spot, every flaw in the defensive systems. The first Zelthian base never knew what hit it. One moment it was a bustling military station with 5,000 personnel. The next moment it was expanding plasma and debris. The pattern repeated across all 17 targets. Human ships appeared, fired, and vanished before the Zelthians could even charge their weapons. When the 6 hours were up, Marcus Flynn gave his report. "All targets destroyed, sir. 0 casualties on our side. Estimated Zelthian military personnel eliminated, 83,000. Palmer felt nothing. No satisfaction, no remorse, just cold determination. Set course for the Zelthian homeworld. It's time to show them what happens when you wake a sleeping monster. The Zelthian homeworld was called Zelkar. It orbited a red giant star and housed 12 billion souls. The planet's orbital defenses were legendary. Layered shield networks that could withstand direct hits from asteroids, quantum displacement fields that made targeting impossible, automated defense grids that could track 1 million incoming threats simultaneously. The Zelthians believed their homeworld was completely safe. They were wrong. The human fleet arrived in the system and immediately encountered the defensive screen. Weapons platforms opened fire. Plasma cannons sent streams of superheated death toward the human ships. Missile swarms numbering in the thousands converged on their targets. It was the most concentrated defensive fire any attacking force had ever faced. Then humanity demonstrated why they were different. Every human ship was equipped with electronic warfare systems that had been refined through centuries of conflict. They didn't try to overwhelm the defenses. They simply convinced the defenses to turn on each other. Within 12 minutes, the orbital defense network was in chaos. Automated systems fired on friendly targets. Shields collapsed from cascading failures. Quantum displacement fields tore themselves apart trying to track targets that didn't exist. Admiral Palmer watched the destruction with grim satisfaction. "Launch the assault shuttles. I want that command center taken intact. We need their data." Commander Patricia Cole led the Marine Assault Force. She was 42 years old and had been a soldier since she was 18. Her team of 500 Marines dropped toward the planetary surface in armored shuttles. The Zelthians scrambled fighters to intercept, but human point defense systems shot them down before they got close. The command center was built inside a mountain, protected by meters of solid rock and the best security systems Zelthian technology could provide. Patricia's team reached it in 4 hours. They used shaped charges to blow through armored doors. They deployed nerve gas into ventilation systems. They moved through corridors like surgical instruments. precise and unstoppable. The Zelthian soldiers were bigger than humans, stronger than humans, and their natural armor plating could stop most small arms fire. But Patricia's Marines had been training for this. They aimed for joints and weak points. They used weapons specifically designed to penetrate Zelthian defenses. They fought with tactics that had been developed over thousands of years of human warfare. When the battle ended, the command center was in human hands. 400 Zelthian soldiers were dead. Patricia had lost 37 Marines. She stood in the central control room and uploaded everything the Zelthians knew to human intelligence. Back on Earth, Vice Admiral Henry Shaw coordinated the massive logistical operation of converting humanity's entire economy to wartime production. Civilian factories that made consumer goods were retooled to produce ammunition and equipment. Cargo ships shed their peaceful exteriors and revealed hidden weapons bays. Research stations that claimed to study peaceful applications of science began producing weapons that would give nightmares to anyone who understood their capabilities. The transformation took 72 hours. 3 days after New Haven's destruction, every human colony, every station, every outpost had become a fortress. The species that had seemed so peaceful revealed that they had been ready for war all along. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Ambassador Clixtor of the Vex Collective stood before the assembly and demanded that humanity cease their military operations immediately. His voice buzzed with indignation as he spoke about galactic law and proper procedures for resolving conflicts. President Helen Wright's hologram appeared before the council. She listened to Clixtor's speech without expression. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her words would be remembered for generations. We tried peace. We built friendships across the galaxy. We believed in cooperation and mutual respect. We trusted that the galactic community would honor life. New Haven was our answer to that trust. 8 million dead humans are what the galaxy gave us in return for 70 years of peaceful behavior. She paused and looked directly at Clixtor. So here is humanity's response. The Zelthian Empire will be destroyed. Every world they control will be occupied. Every ship they operate will be captured or eliminated. Every military officer who participated in the New Haven massacre will face human justice. This is not negotiable. Clixtor's mandibles clicked in shock. You cannot simply ignore galactic law. We are not ignoring it, Wright replied coldly. We are replacing it. The galaxy has proven that laws mean nothing without the power to enforce them. Humanity will provide that power. The transmission ended. The council chamber erupted in chaos as species realized what humanity was declaring. They were not seeking justice within the existing system. They were overthrowing the system itself. The Draxian Confederacy made a fatal mistake. The reptilian species had been humanity's trading partners for decades. But they calculated that the Zelthians would win this conflict and decided to support the stronger side. They assembled a war fleet and sent it to reinforce Zelthian defenses. Captain Jake Morrison intercepted them at the Kepler Junction, a strategic point where 3 major hyperspace lanes intersected. His ship, the TSS Horizon, was still officially a diplomatic vessel, but like everything else about humanity's peaceful facade, that was a lie. Sir, we're detecting the Draxian fleet, Lisa Hayes reported from her station. 50 capital ships, 200 escorts, and support vessels. They're demanding we move aside or be destroyed. Jake felt a cold rage building inside him. The Draxians had eaten at his table. He had negotiated trade deals with their diplomats. He had believed they were friends. Now they were siding with the species that had murdered 8 million humans. Activate combat protocols, he ordered quietly. Show them what we really are. The horizon transformed. Panels slid away to reveal weapons ports. Systems that had been disguised as cargo holds powered up. The ship that had seemed so peaceful revealed enough firepower to level a city. The Draxian fleet commander broadcast a message filled with threats and demands. Jake didn't bother to respond. He simply opened fire. The battle was brief and brutal. The Horizon's weapons had been designed by engineers who understood that future conflicts would require overwhelming force. Energy beams sliced through Draxian shields like they weren't there. Missiles used guidance systems that couldn't be jammed. Point defense grids shot down every incoming attack with casual efficiency. When it ended, the Draxian fleet was debris. 50 capital ships reduced to wreckage. Thousands of Draxian lives snuffed out. The Horizon had taken damage, and 70% of Jake's crew were casualties. But the message was clear to anyone watching. Every human ship was more dangerous than it appeared. Every station could defend itself. Every installation held weapons that violated every treaty the galaxy had ever written. Humanity had been hiding in plain sight, and now the mask was off. Danny Price worked through his injuries in the Horizon's engineering section. Half his team was dead, including his best friend Carl. The engine room was scarred with blast marks and blood. But Danny kept working because that's what humans did. They kept going no matter how much it hurt. Lieutenant Sophie Grant, the communications officer, managed to survive the battle. She was 26 years old and had joined the fall of the Zelthian Empire sent waves of fear across civilized space. Species that had existed for millions of years suddenly understood they had been living with monsters disguised as friends. Humanity's true nature was revealed, and it was nothing like what the galaxy had believed. The Noltar Collective learned this lesson the hard way. They were beings of pure energy who had never known defeat in their 40,000 years of existence. Their non-corporeal forms could pass through solid matter. They couldn't be shot, couldn't be poisoned, couldn't be harmed by any conventional weapon. They considered themselves invincible. When news of the Zelthian defeat reached them, the Noltar leadership decided that humanity needed to be put in their place before they grew too powerful. They chose to attack a small human mining operation in the Sagittarius Arm. It was supposed to be a demonstration, a warning that humanity should remember their place in the galactic order. Dr. Susan Blake was working in her laboratory on the mining platform when the attack began. She was a physicist who had spent 15 years studying exotic forms of matter and energy. She was also a widow. Her husband had died on New Haven along with their 2 children. She had been too consumed by grief to even cry anymore. When the Noltar phased through the station's walls and began killing the 300 miners stationed there, something broke inside Susan. She watched the energy beings drain the life from people she knew. She heard them communicating in their strange frequency patterns, enjoying the terror they caused. Susan's laboratory held experimental equipment designed to study quantum entanglement and electromagnetic resonance. She had been working on theoretical applications, academic papers that would never be used in the real world. But as she watched her coworkers die, she realized her research had a very practical application. She worked for 30 minutes while the Noltar killed around her. She bypassed every safety protocol. She overrode every warning system. She turned her entire laboratory into a weapon that shouldn't exist. The physics were sound, but the ethics were monstrous. When she activated it, the mining platform became a resonance bomb that disrupted the exact frequencies the Noltar used to maintain consciousness. 3,000 energy beings simply stopped existing. They didn't die in any conventional sense. They just ceased to be aware, ceased to think, ceased to exist as individuals. They became random energy dispersing into space. Susan stood in her laboratory surrounded by the humming equipment and felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, just emptiness. She had been a scientist who wanted to understand the universe. Now she was a weapon designer who had committed what might be genocide. Admiral Palmer received her report and immediately classified it as the highest level of secret. He also promoted Susan to head of weapons research and gave her unlimited resources. The galaxy needed to know that humanity could kill anything, even beings that were supposed to be unkillable. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council attempted to organize opposition to humanity's rampage. Ambassador Clickstor managed to assemble a coalition fleet representing 17 different species. They were determined to force humanity back into compliance with galactic law. They gathered at the Azure Nebula, a location chosen for its strategic importance. The coalition fleet numbered over 4,000 ships. It was the largest military force assembled in the galaxy's recent history. The species involved believed their numerical superiority would overwhelm human technology. They had convinced themselves that humanity's victories were due to surprise, and that prepared defenders could stop them. Admiral Palmer didn't personally command this battle. Instead, he sent Commodore Paul Henderson, a man known for unconventional tactics and creative solutions to impossible problems. Paul was 55 years old and had fought in the Lunar Independence War, one of the last major conflicts before humanity joined the galactic community. Paul's fleet consisted of only 200 ships. The coalition outnumbered him 20-1. Under normal circumstances, this would be called suicide. But humans didn't fight normal battles. The coalition expected a straightforward engagement. Their ships would overwhelm the human forces through sheer numbers. Their commanders had studied the previous battles and thought they understood human tactics. They were completely wrong. Paul didn't engage the coalition fleet directly. Instead, his ships deployed thousands of small drones throughout the nebula. Each drone was barely larger than a fighter craft and carried a single weapon, a device that could temporarily create microscopic wormholes. When the coalition fleet advanced, the drones activated. Thousands of tiny wormholes opened inside ship engines, inside weapon systems, inside shield generators, not large enough to destroy the ships instantly, but large enough to cause catastrophic failures. In 40 minutes, the coalition fleet was crippled. Ships collided with each other as their navigation systems failed. Reactors went critical as coolant systems vented into space. Weapons exploded inside their own ships. The mighty armada that was supposed to stop humanity became a graveyard floating in space. Paul watched the destruction from his command ship and felt sick. He had just killed hundreds of thousands of beings. The fact that they had been trying to kill him didn't make it easier. But he also knew that showing mercy now would only lead to more conflict. The galaxy needed to learn that fighting humanity was suicide. Commander Lisa Hayes received her own command during this period. She was given the warship Vengeance and a crew of elite personnel. Her first mission was to deal with the Vex Collective. Intelligence had discovered that the Vex had provided information to the Zelthians about human colony locations. The coordinates of New Haven had come from Vex surveillance drones. Lisa had always believed in justice, in proper procedures, in giving people a chance to explain and defend themselves. But when she read the reports showing how the Vex had sold human lives for trade concessions, something hardened inside her. She didn't attack Vex military targets. She went after their hive cities, the places where their queens lived and bred. The Vex were an insectoid species that organized around genetic royalty. Kill the queens and the entire civilization would collapse. Dr. Susan Blake provided the weapon. She had created a biological agent specifically designed to target Vex neural chemistry. It wouldn't kill them immediately. Instead, it would put the queens into deep comas from which they would never wake. Without their queens, the Vex workers would continue functioning, but could never reproduce. Within a generation, the entire species would go extinct. Lisa deployed the weapon on 6 major Vex worlds. She watched through monitors as hive cities that had stood for millions of years fell silent. Billions of Vex would die slowly over the coming decades. She had committed an act that future generations would call genocide. She did it without hesitation because the alternative was letting New Haven's killers go unpunished. Back on Earth, President Helen Wright faced opposition from within humanity itself. Senator Charles Mason stood before the Global Assembly and gave an impassioned speech about humanity losing its soul. "We've become the monsters we always feared," Charles shouted. "We're not defending ourselves anymore. We're conquering. We're occupying. We're committing atrocities that will haunt us for generations. If we continue down this path, we'll be no better than the Zelthians who attacked New Haven." The debate raged for hours. Some agreed with Charles. Others called him a traitor who didn't understand what was at stake. The gallery was filled with citizens who had lost family on New Haven and wanted revenge. The vote was close, but Charles lost. President Wright addressed the assembly after the vote. Her face was tired and her voice was heavy. "I understand Senator Mason's concerns. I share some of them. But the galaxy made a choice when they glassed New Haven. They showed us that our peaceful nature was seen as weakness. They proved that our friendship meant nothing. So now we teach them a different lesson. We show them what happens when humanity stops pretending to be something we're not." The speech was broadcast across all human worlds. Wright's approval rating was 93%. Humanity had made its choice. They would rather be feared than vulnerable. The galaxy's economy began collapsing under the strain of the war. Humanity had integrated itself into every major trade route over 7 decades. They had become essential to supply chains across hundreds of worlds. When they withdrew everything and repurposed it for war, entire civilizations faced starvation. The crystalline concordate, a silicon-based species known for their neutrality and wisdom, offered to mediate peace. They were ancient beings who had seen countless wars and believed they understood conflict. They invited both sides to negotiations on a neutral station. Captain Jake Morrison was sent to represent humanity. He had been promoted and given diplomatic credentials despite his warrior's record. The Concordate's envoy was a being called Harmonizer 7 Theta. a crystal structure that communicated through light patterns. The meeting room was elegant and designed to make all species comfortable. Harmonizer 7 Theta began with traditional greetings and statements about the importance of finding peaceful solutions. Jake let the crystal being talk for 20 minutes. Then he interrupted. "I have something to show you," Jake said quietly. He activated a holographic display that filled the room. The display showed 6 months after New Haven burned, the galaxy had been reshaped by human fury. 32 species had surrendered their military forces. 15 others had been forcibly disarmed. The Galactic Council had dissolved, its authority shattered by species that could no longer agree on anything except their fear of humanity. The Terran Coalition stood alone at the top of the galactic hierarchy, and the cost was becoming impossible to ignore. Colonel Patricia Cole walked through the ruins of what had been the Draxian capital city. Her Marines had taken it in 3 days of brutal urban combat. The victory had been total and the casualties on the Draxian side were massive. But as Patricia watched refugees streaming past her position, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. She felt shame. The refugees were families, parents carrying children too young to understand what had happened. Elderly Draxians who moved slowly, their scales dulled by age and fear. Teenagers who stared at the human soldiers with expressions that mixed terror and hatred. They had done nothing wrong except be born to the wrong species at the wrong time. Lieutenant Craig Peters stood beside Patricia, his rifle held at a ready position. He was 23 years old and had joined the Marines to see the galaxy and serve humanity. He hadn't expected to become an occupying force in someone else's city. "We're not liberators anymore, are we?" Craig asked quietly. "We're not the good guys helping people. We're just conquerors now." Patricia wanted to disagree. She wanted to explain that they were doing what was necessary to protect humanity. She wanted to justify the occupation by pointing to New Haven and the 8 million dead, but she couldn't find the words because Craig was right. "We're what we need to be," she finally said. "Whether that makes us good or bad, history will decide." Back on Earth, Dr. Susan Blake stood in a military courtroom facing charges of crimes against sentient life. The prosecution had evidence of her bioweapons and the death toll they had caused. 30 million Vex had died when their queens fell into comas. The species was functionally extinct now. A civilization that had existed for 40 million years had been erased in weeks. The prosecutor, a young man named Alan Foster, presented his case with clear passion. He showed footage of Vex hive cities falling silent. He displayed testimony from xenobiologists who explained how the weapon had worked. He argued that Susan had committed genocide and deserved the harshest punishment available. Susan sat through the trial without showing emotion. When it was her turn to testify, she took the stand and answered questions in a flat, tired voice. "Did you create the bioweapon that killed 30 million Vex?" Alan asked. "Yes," Susan replied. "Did you know it would cause the extinction of their entire species?" "Yes." "Do you regret your actions?" Susan was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked directly at Alan with empty eyes. "My husband was named Greg. My daughter was Emily. My son was Nathan. They died on New Haven while I was at work light years away. The Vex gave the Zelthians the coordinates. They sold my family's lives for trade agreements." She paused and took a breath. "So no, I don't regret it. I'd do it again. I'd create 100 weapons. I'd kill 1 billion aliens. Because maybe then no other human mother will watch her children die while the galaxy does nothing." The courtroom was silent. Alan had no response. The judges deliberated for 2 days and found her guilty on 17 counts. The sentence was death by execution, but before it could be carried out, protests erupted across human space. "She was defending us," became the rallying cry. "She did what was necessary." Justice for New Haven appeared on signs and broadcasts. President Wright received millions of messages demanding clemency for Susan. Wright commuted the sentence to life imprisonment. Susan was transferred to a secure facility where she would spend the rest of her days. When Commander Lisa Hayes visited her there, Susan showed no gratitude for avoiding execution. "I made sure they could never hurt us again," Susan said simply. "Every weapon I created, every species I helped destroy, it was all to protect humanity. If that makes me a monster, then I'm a monster. But at least I'm a monster who keeps humans safe." Lisa left the prison understanding something fundamental. Susan represented humanity's new reality. They had become willing to embrace any evil, commit any atrocity, accept any moral cost if it meant protecting their own. The question was whether they could ever come back from that. The breaking point came at Omega Station, a neutral port where species gathered to trade and interact. It had been established before humanity joined the galactic community, and was considered sacred ground where violence was forbidden. The station's operators struggled to maintain neutrality as the war raged around them. A group of young human soldiers, fresh from combat on the front lines, encountered a group of Zelthian refugees in the station's market district. The refugees were civilians, families who had fled their homeworld before humanity occupied it. They wore civilian clothes and carried no weapons. They were just trying to survive. Private Kevin Ross was 20 years old and had been fighting for 3 months straight. He had watched friends die in combat. He had seen what Zelthian weapons did to human bodies. When he saw the Zelthian civilians, something snapped inside him. "They're all guilty," Kevin shouted to his squad mates. Every single one of them knew about New Haven. The station's surveillance showed what happened next. Kevin and 6 other soldiers opened fire on the unarmed refugees. 3 Zelthians died, including a child. Others were wounded. Station security tried to intervene, but the human soldiers fought them off. Commander Lisa Hayes was on Omega Station for a resupply stop. She arrived to find her own people committing murder and claiming self-defense. The surveillance footage showed clearly that it was an unprovoked attack. She had no choice but to arrest them. The soldiers refused. They raised their weapons at Lisa. They told her they were doing what needed to be done. They said the only good Zelthian was a dead one. Lisa had commanded these people. She had trained with them. She had trusted them with her life. Now she had to make a choice. She could let them go and become complicit in murder, or she could enforce discipline and possibly die trying. She drew her sidearm and ordered them one more time to surrender. Kevin Ross aimed his rifle at her. She shot him before he could fire. The other soldiers opened fire and Lisa's security team responded. When it ended, Kevin and 2 others were dead. 4 soldiers were wounded and under arrest. 3 Zelthian bodies lay where they had fallen. Lisa stood in the corridor surrounded by bodies and felt something break inside her. She had just killed her own people to protect aliens. She had enforced galactic law against humans. She didn't know if she had done the right thing or if there even was a right thing anymore. President Helen Wright received a message from Ambassador Clixtor of the Vex Collective. It wasn't a plea for peace or a diplomatic overture. It was evidence. Video recordings of human soldiers executing prisoners. Testimony from occupied worlds describing brutality and oppression. Reports of colonies being stripped of resources to fuel humanity's war machine. The message ended with a simple statement. You have become what you claim to fight against. The galaxy feared the Zelthians for their cruelty. Now they fear you more. Wright called an emergency meeting with her military leadership. Admiral George Palmer, Vice Admiral Henry Shaw, Commodore Paul Henderson, and Commander Lisa Hayes all attended via secure holographic link. The question on the table was simple but terrifying. Had humanity gone too far? New Haven demands justice, Admiral Palmer argued. His voice was firm, but he looked older than his years. 8 million people died. We can't just forgive that. We can't let the galaxy think they can attack us without consequences. But what are we now? Lisa countered. Her uniform was still stained with blood from Omega Station. We're killing civilians. We're occupying worlds. We're forcing entire species into subjugation. This isn't defense anymore. It's domination. It's empire building. The debate continued for hours. Commodore Henderson argued for maintaining pressure until every potential threat was neutralized. Admiral Shaw pointed out that the Terran economy couldn't sustain total war indefinitely. Lisa kept returning to the moral argument that they were losing their humanity with every atrocity. President Wright listened to all of them. She reviewed the evidence of war crimes. She read reports from occupied worlds. She watched footage of human soldiers doing things that would have horrified the people who founded the Terran Coalition. Then she made her decision. We continue military operations until all threats are neutralized, she announced. But I'm creating the Oversight Commission, to be led by Senator Charles Mason. They will investigate all accusations of war crimes, including those committed by our own people. We will not become mindless monsters. We will maintain discipline and humanity even as we wage total war. It was a compromise that satisfied no one. The military thought it would undermine their authority. The peace faction thought it didn't go far enough. But it was the best solution Wright could find to an impossible problem. Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to Commodore, received new orders. He was to secure the Andromeda Gate, a strategic location that controlled access to 3 major spiral arms of the galaxy. Intelligence indicated that 15 species were planning a coordinated counterattack. If they succeeded, 14 months after the destruction of New Haven, the war ended not with a grand treaty or a final climactic battle, but with simple exhaustion. The galaxy had been pacified through overwhelming force. Humanity controlled the major trade routes, maintained occupation forces on 70 worlds, and had dismantled every significant military that once threatened them. They had achieved total victory. The cost was measured in ways that numbers could never fully capture. Admiral George Palmer stood in the memorial chamber on Earth, surrounded by holographic displays showing the faces of the dead. 200,000 human soldiers and civilians had been lost during the war. Each face stared out from the displays, frozen in moments before they died. Palmer had commanded them all. He had sent them into battles knowing many wouldn't return. He had made decisions that saved the human species while condemning individuals to death. "Do you sleep at night?" Senator Charles Mason asked. He had come to the memorial chamber to meet with Palmer privately, away from cameras and recordings. Palmer was quiet for a long moment, looking at the faces. "No," he finally admitted. "I see them every time I close my eyes. Every order I gave, every ship I sent into combat, every person who died because I made a tactical decision." He turned to face Mason. "But I'd do it all again, because the alternative was letting humanity be victims, and I swore that would never happen." Mason nodded slowly. "That's what frightens me, Admiral. Not that you feel guilty, but that you'd still make the same choices. We've won the war, but what have we become?" The question hung in the air without an answer. President Helen Wright's final address to humanity came from the newly constructed Terran Command Center, a massive space station positioned at the galactic core. Around her, representatives from subjugated species waited in silent ranks. The Galactic Council had been replaced by the Terran Directorate. Humanity ruled not through cooperation but through the threat of force. 14 months ago, the colony of New Haven was destroyed, Wright began. Her voice was steady but lacked the warmth it once had. 8 million human souls were murdered without warning or mercy. The galaxy showed us what they truly thought of our peaceful nature. They showed us that friendship meant nothing when power was available. She paused and looked at the alien representatives. We responded with total war. We dismantled empires that had existed for millennia. We occupied worlds that thought themselves untouchable. We demonstrated that humanity would not be victims ever again. Another pause. "But I will not stand here and claim victory without acknowledging what we've become." We set out to punish the guilty. We ended up dominating the galaxy. In the audience, Ambassador Clickstor clicked softly. The Vex Collective had submitted to human rule. Their queens were monitored constantly. Their reproduction was controlled by Terran overseers. His species would survive, but only as subjects of humanity. He wondered if extinction might have been more merciful. Commander Lisa Hayes received her promotion to Admiral and command of the Terran occupation forces. It was the most important military position aside from Palmer himself. She accepted the responsibility while knowing it would define her for the rest of her life. Her first order was to establish war crimes tribunals to investigate atrocities committed during the conflict. She appointed Senator Mason as the chief prosecutor. The first trial was Dr. Susan Blake. The evidence was overwhelming. Her bioweapons had killed 30 million Vex. Her designs had been used to exterminate the Noltar Collective. Her research had enabled weapons that violated every ethical principle humanity once claimed to hold. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The verdict was guilty on 17 counts of crimes against sentient life. The sentence was death by execution. But when it was announced, protests erupted across human space. "She protected us" became the rallying cry. She did what was necessary. Justice for New Haven appeared on millions of broadcasts and communications. President Wright reviewed the case personally. She read every piece of evidence. She watched footage of Vex hive cities falling silent. She listened to testimony about the Noltar being erased from existence. Then she read letters from human families thanking Susan for keeping them safe. The sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Susan Blake was transferred to a maximum security facility, where she would spend her remaining years. When Lisa visited her after the sentencing, Susan showed no gratitude for avoiding execution. "I'd do it again," Susan said, sitting in her cell. Her voice was flat and emotionless. "Every weapon, every death, every species I helped destroy. My family died on New Haven. I made sure no one could ever do that to another human family." She looked directly at Lisa. "You can call me a monster. You can lock me away. But deep down you know I did what all of you wanted done." Lisa left the prison without responding because Susan was right. The human population overwhelmingly supported what she had done. They wanted protection, and Susan had provided it through the most terrible means imaginable. Captain Jake Morrison retired from active service 6 months after the war ended. He was 45 years old and looked 20 years older. The battles had aged him in ways that went beyond the physical. He tried to return to civilian life, to remember the person he had been before New Haven, before the mask came off. That person no longer existed. He took an apartment on Luna and spent his days staring at the Earth hanging in the sky. He received visitors sometimes, former crew members checking on him, reporters wanting interviews he never gave, therapists suggesting treatments he didn't pursue. Mostly he just sat alone with memories of all the people who had died under his command. Danny Price was one of those memories. The engineer who had believed in friendship across species, who had made connections with aliens on every world they visited, who had died trying to keep the Horizon's engines running during the battle at Andromeda Gate. Jake blamed himself for Danny's death even though he knew it wasn't rational. Command meant living with impossible choices. Lieutenant Sophie Grant found Jake 6 months into his retirement. She had also left the service, unable to continue being part of the military machine. They sat in Jake's apartment and shared a drink without talking about the war. But the silence was heavy with everything they had experienced. "Do you think we were right?" Sophie finally asked. "Not legally or strategically, but morally. Were we right to do what we did?" Jake stared at his drink for a long time before answering. "I don't know. New Haven happened and it demanded a response, but somewhere between justice and vengeance we crossed a line. Maybe several lines. I can justify every individual decision I made, but when I look at the sum total at all those decisions together, I'm not sure I recognize humanity anymore." Sophie nodded. She had broadcast footage of battles across the galaxy, helping humanity's propaganda effort. She had shown the enemy what happened when you fought humans. Now she wondered if she had helped create a monster. The galaxy adapted to its new reality slowly and painfully. The Terran Directorate proved to be efficient administrators. Trade resumed under human supervision. Piracy was eliminated completely. Border disputes were settled by human arbitrators whose decisions couldn't be appealed or challenged. A kind of peace had been achieved, but it was peace maintained through fear. Every species knew what happened to those who opposed humanity. The Zelthian Empire was a broken shell of its former self. The Vex faced slow extinction. The Draxian Confederacy existed only as a puppet state. The Crystalline Concordat, ancient and wise, served human interests now. Commodore Paul Henderson commanded the Terran Border Guard, patrolling the frontier between known space and unexplored regions. His ships encountered new species regularly, and his orders were clear. Establish diplomatic relations but make humanity's strength evident from the first contact. When they met the Kaldorian Unity, a peaceful species of amphibious beings who had never known war, Paul's first action was to demonstrate human weapons capabilities. He destroyed an uninhabited moon with a single ship to show what humanity could do. The Kaldorians immediately requested to join the Terran Directorate as junior members. They had learned the lesson the rest of the galaxy had learned. You could be humanity's friend or humanity's subject, but you couldn't be their equal. 10 years after New Haven's destruction, a memorial was erected on the rebuilt colony. The planet had been terraformed again, its scars healed by technology and time. 8 million names were carved into black stone that stretched for kilometers. Families came from across human space to see the names of loved ones. The memorial's inscription became famous across the galaxy. They wanted us weak. They found us willing to become monsters. Never again will humanity hide what it is. Never again will we apologize for survival. President Wright, in her final year of office, gave a speech at the memorial's dedication. She was 70 years old and looked every day of it. The war had aged her like it had aged everyone who fought in it. "We did what we believed was necessary," she said to the assembled crowd. "We avenged our dead. We protected our living. We ensured that humanity would never again be victims. She paused and her voice grew softer. But we also lost something in the process. We lost our innocence. We lost our belief that the galaxy was fundamentally good. We lost the trust we once had in other species. 100 years had passed since the destruction of New Haven. The galaxy that existed now bore little resemblance to the one that had existed before. The Terran Directorate controlled everything that mattered. Trade routes, military operations, diplomatic relations, all flowed through human hands. The species that once competed for influence now existed in humanity's shadow. Some accepted this reality. Others resented it silently. None dared challenge it openly. The memorial on New Haven had become the most visited site in human space. Millions came every year to see the 8 million names carved in black stone. Historians gave lectures about what had happened. Teachers brought students to learn about the day that changed everything. Veterans gathered to remember comrades lost not just on New Haven, but in the war that followed. The memorial had become a shrine to human determination and a warning to anyone who might forget what humanity was capable of. Director Patricia Cole was 93 years old when she gave her final speech at the memorial. She had spent 5 decades working for reconciliation between species, trying to heal wounds that many believed could never heal. Her hair was white and her body was frail, but her voice remained strong. "I was there when the war began," she told the assembled crowd. "I led Marines in battles that destroyed cities. I occupied worlds and enforced human will through force. I did terrible things because I believed they were necessary. And for 50 years after, I tried to undo some of that damage, to prove that humans could be more than conquerors." She paused and looked out at the thousands of faces, both human and alien, listening to her words. "Did I succeed? I don't know. Relations between species have improved. Young people today can't imagine the hatred that existed a century ago, but beneath the surface the fear remains. Other species cooperate with us because they have no choice. We rule through power, not through trust, and I don't know if that will ever change." In the crowd, a young human named Amy Foster listened carefully. She was 25 years old and worked as a diplomat in the Terran Foreign Service. She had grown up in a galaxy where human dominance was normal, where other species deferred to human authority automatically. She had never known anything else. To her generation, this was simply how things were. But Amy had been reading history, including the private journals of people like Admiral Palmer and President Wright. She had learned about the humans who existed before the mask came off, the explorers and dreamers who genuinely wanted friendship with alien species, the diplomats who believed in cooperation rather than domination, the scientists who shared knowledge freely rather than hoarding it as strategic advantage. She wondered if humanity could ever return to being that species, or if the transformation was permanent. The Vex Collective had stabilized at a population of 5 billion, down from their pre-war peak of 40 billion. Their queens remained under Terran supervision, their reproduction carefully controlled to prevent them from ever threatening human interests again. Ambassador Clixtor had died decades earlier, but his successor, a younger Vex named Tiknash, continued working within the system humanity had imposed. Tiknash attended a Terran Directorate meeting where new trade regulations were being discussed. The humans barely acknowledged the alien representatives. Decisions were made, policies were announced, and objections were noted but rarely considered. This was normal. This was how the galaxy worked now. After the meeting, Amy Foster approached Tiknash. She had been assigned to work with the Vex on cultural exchange programs, part of Patricia Cole's ongoing reconciliation efforts. "I wanted to ask you something," Amy said carefully, "and I want an honest answer, not a diplomatic one. Do you hate us? Do the Vex hate humanity for what we did to your species?" Tiknash's mandibles clicked in what might have been surprise. Humans rarely asked such direct questions. "Hate is complicated," he finally answered. "We understand why you responded as you did to New Haven. We even accept some responsibility for providing information to the Zelthians. But yes, there is resentment. Your ancestors nearly destroyed us. They took our ability to control our own future. We exist now only because humanity allows it." Amy nodded slowly. "What would it take for that to change? Not the facts of what happened, but the relationship we have now." "Time," Tiknash said. "Many generations. And humans would need to choose to relinquish some of their power voluntarily, to trust us again, But I don't know if your species is capable of that anymore. The war changed you fundamentally. The conversation stayed with Amy for days. She began talking to other young humans about the galaxy they had inherited. Some dismissed her concerns. We won, they argued. Why should we apologize for being strong? Others were more thoughtful. They wondered if permanent domination was really the best outcome humanity could achieve. A movement began slowly among young people across human space. They called themselves the New Path Coalition. Their goal was to gradually transform the Terran Directorate from a military occupation into a genuine democratic federation where all species had real representation. It was idealistic and many older humans called it naive, but it attracted followers. Admiral Lisa Hayes, now 103 years old, watched the New Path Coalition with interest from her retirement home on Mars. She had survived longer than most of her generation, watching the galaxy evolve in ways both expected and surprising. When Amy Foster requested a meeting, Lisa agreed. You want to change how we govern the galaxy? Lisa said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Admiral, Amy replied. I believe humanity can be strong without being oppressive. I think we can maintain security without permanent occupation. I think other species can be partners rather than subjects. Lisa smiled sadly. I believed that once too. Before New Haven, before the war, before I learned what the galaxy really is. She paused. But maybe your generation can succeed where mine failed. Maybe enough time has passed that trust is possible again. Will you support us? Amy asked. Publicly, no, Lisa said. I'm too associated with the war and the occupation. My support would hurt you more than help. But privately, yes. You have my blessing. Try to build something better than what we left you. The New Path Coalition gained support slowly. It took 15 years before they had enough political power to propose actual reforms to the Terran Directorate. The proposal was simple. Give non-human species real representation in the government, with binding votes on policies that affected them. Create independent courts where disputes could be resolved fairly. Gradually reduce military occupation forces as trust was established. The opposition was fierce. Many humans believed that any reduction in power was dangerous. We've been safe for a century because we stayed strong, argued Senator Kyle Bradford. The moment we show weakness, the galaxy will turn on us again. New Haven taught us that lesson. Are we really going to forget it? The debate raged across human space. Public opinion was divided. Some supported reform. Others wanted to maintain the status quo. The vote in the Terran Assembly was scheduled for March 15, 2285, exactly 150 years after New Haven's destruction. On March 14th, something unexpected happened. The Zelthian ambassador, Krathnak's granddaughter, a young Zelthian named Siranal, made an unprecedented broadcast. She spoke directly to the human people. My ancestors destroyed New Haven, she said. They committed a crime that can never be forgiven. Your ancestors responded with fury that reshaped the galaxy. Both actions were understandable in their context. Both caused immeasurable suffering. She paused. But we are not our ancestors. The humans alive today did not wage the war. The Zelthians alive today did not glass New Haven. We inherited this situation. The question is whether we will perpetuate it or transform it. She continued. I am asking humanity to take a chance on us. Not to forget what happened, not to pretend the past doesn't matter, but to allow us to prove that we can be trusted, to give us the opportunity to build something better than what exists now. We will fail sometimes. We will make mistakes. But isn't that better than permanent resentment? The broadcast went viral. Billions of humans watched it. Many were moved by Siranal's sincerity. Others remained skeptical, but it shifted the conversation. The vote the next day passed by a narrow margin. The reforms would be implemented over the next 20 years. The changes came slowly and carefully. Non-human representatives gained real power in the Terran Assembly. Independent courts were established with judges from multiple species. Military occupation forces began gradual withdrawal from worlds that maintained peaceful compliance. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks and conflicts, but it was progress. Commodore Paul Henderson, now retired and living on a colony world, watched the changes with mixed feelings. He had spent his career enforcing human dominance. He had taught new species to fear humanity from first contact. Now the galaxy was moving in a different direction. Do you think we're making a mistake? His wife, Linda, asked him one evening as they watched news reports about the latest reforms. Paul considered the question carefully. I don't know. The military part of me says we're giving up strategic advantages we might need later, but the human part of me hopes that maybe we can be better than we've been. Maybe the kids are right and permanent domination isn't the only way to stay safe.